Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Cut Rate Commander, the series in which we take a look at low-priced commanders and make budget decks with them. My name is Grazzet and today we'll be looking at Modern Horizon 2's Efreet Gambler, Yusri, Fortune's Flame. Before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see what commanders you can vote for in the comments for an upcoming episode. With that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Yusri Fortune's Flame is a 2/3 efreet with flying that costs 1, a red and a blue, with the following text. Whenever Yusri Fortune's Flame attacks, choose a number between 1 and 5. Flip that many coins. For each flip you win, draw a card. For each flip you lose, Yusri deals 2 damage to you. If you won 5 flips this way, you may cast spells from your hand this turn without paying their mana costs. So the 3 CMC we're paying for him nets us a respectable evasive body and a high-risk, high-reward form of card draw, alongside a very low chance of casting Omniscience for free for the turn or blasting ourselves in the face for 10. On average, however, if we elect to flip the 5 coins when swinging with Yusri, we'll be drawing 2.5 cards at the cost of 5 life, making it comparable to cards like Greed and Villainous Broker of Blood that let players in black pay life for card advantage. And to be clear, we should always be flipping all 5 coins. There's really no reason not to, since netting 2 to 3 cards at the cost of 4 to 6 life and no mana investment is a great rate in our format. And sure, we'll run into a 3% chance of just hitting ourselves in the face for 10 for no value, but we have an equal chance to draw 5 and cast a free Omniscience for the turn, which will usually give us a huge advantage or just win the game for us outright. So we know that Yusri is an evasive lad that flips coins and draws us cards, but how do we make the most of that skill set? Looking at the coin flip side of things, we can certainly embrace the playstyle of the original Flippy Boys Zinder Split and Okun to go all in on a coin flip chaos deck. Yusri should be flipping 5 coins a turn after all, generating that many more payoffs for cards that care about coin flips. The issue we run into is that Yusri isn't a coin flip payoff himself, which is what makes other coin flip based commanders better, ultimately landing him in the 99 of these decks instead of being the headliner in my opinion. Several wheels builds have been floating around as well, since Yusri is good at generating us card draw to churn through our deck relatively quickly, triggering card draw payoffs as well as self-mill win conditions. But the issue with wheelie decks is that they tend to be really expensive, ultimately falling out of our price range for a focused build on our budget. So ultimately, the build that I settled on was a cantrip focused one, running plenty of low mana spells that are able to replace themselves as we cast them. This not only benefits from Yusri's built-in draw to continue drawing cards in the event we fail to draw into more cantrips naturally, but really benefits from Yusri's omnipotence-like effect on the off chance we get 5 heads, usually allowing us to churn through our entire deck in one turn. And since we're running a cantrip deck, we'll be running plenty of cards that benefit us from casting our spells, such as various evasive prowess creatures that become huge and swing over blockers, as well as classic spellslinger payoffs that burn our opponents as we cast spell after spell. Additionally, we'll be running a handful of cards that work nicely alongside Yusri to take advantage of his coin flips, or just make sure he doesn't hit us too hard while drawing us cards. So check your hands, place your bets, and make sure you say your prayers to RNGesus because we're either going to win big or lose big. Or statistically just draw a few cards and take some damage. Either way, let's see if the odds are in our favor. So now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's start taking a look at the deck itself by starting with the creatures. Skipping to the CMC2 slot, we open with some burn in the form of Electrostatic Field, Thermo Alchemist, and Firebrand Archer. All 3 burn our opponents for 1, Electrostatic Field being a 0/4 with Defender that does so whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, Thermo Alchemist being a 0/3 Defender that we can tap to do this, which untaps whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, and finally Firebrand Archer being a 2/1 that does this whenever we cast a non-creature spell, all being more than capable of dealing serious amounts of burn to our opponents when we chain our cantrips together. Moving deeper into this slot, we have some ramp in the form of Curious Homunculus and a Tavern Scoundrel. Curious Homunculus is a 1/1 that taps for a colorless, which we can only use to pay for instants and sorceries. Additionally, on our upkeep, once we have 3 or more instants or sorceries in our grave, it transforms into Voracious Reader, a 3/4 with prowess that also reduces the cost of all our instants and sorceries by 1, making it a good source of ramp for our spells early that can quickly turn into a credible threat that gets even bigger as we cast our spells, in addition to reducing their costs. Tavern Scoundrel is a 1/3 that creates 2 treasure tokens whenever we win a coin flip and can be tapped for 1 to sack a permanent and flip a coin, giving us a potentially huge amount of ramp alongside our commander with utility to sack our permanents if and when necessary. Finally, we close out this slot with Storm Chaser Mage, a 1/3 flyer with haste and prowess that we can drop early to get in for decent damage as we cast our cantrips. Moving into the CMC3 slot, we have some prowess adjacent effects with Wee Dragonauts, Umara Mystic, and Adeliz the Cinder Wind. We Dragonauts and Elmara Mystic are both 1/3 flyers that gain +2/+0 whenever we cast an instant or sorcery until the end of the turn, with the Mystic also proccing off wizard spells, giving us some fast-growing evasive bodies that grow out of control after just a few spells. Adeliz is a 2/2 flyer with haste that pumps all wizards including itself by +1/+1 whenever we cast an instant or sorcery until the end of the turn, effectively giving us another hasty evasive body with prowess with the added benefit of pumping all our other wizards, which we run enough of to warrant her inclusion. Then closing out this slot we have Enigma Drake, Bloodwater Entity, and Gutter Snipe. Enigma Drake is a star 3 flyer whose power is equal to the number of instants and sorceries in our graveyard, giving us an ever-growing evasive threat as we cast our cantrips turn after turn. Bloodwater Entity is a 2/2 flyer with prowess that, when it ETBs, returns an instant or sorcery from our grave to the top of our deck, giving us another evasive prowess creature that gives us some passable recursion as well. Gutter Snipe is a 2/2 that burns all our opponents for 2 whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, making it the big brother of our other burn creatures, doubling the damage output that they put out to kill our opponents that much faster. The CMC 4 slot then brings us some more spells matter payoffs in the form of Stormkiln Artist, Archmage Emeritus, and Talrand Sky Summoner. Stormkiln Artist is a 2/2 with Magecraft that creates a treasure whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery, making it a perfect source of ramp alongside our cantrips, as it can usually replace some, if not all, of the mana we use to cast them. Archmage Emeritus is another 2/2 with Magecraft, this time drawing us a card whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery, turning our normal spells into cantrips and our cantrips into legitimate card advantage so long as it remains alive. Talrand is another 2/2, this time creating a 2/2 flying token whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, giving us the option to go wide with evasive bodies instead of tall when the situation calls for it. We then close out this slot with Crackling Drake and Niblis of Frost. Crackling Drake is a star 4 flyer whose power is equal to the number of instants and sorceries we have in our grave and in exile, as well as drawing us a card when it ETBs, making it Enigma Drake's big brother that counts even exiled spells and even cantrips us as a bonus. Niblis of Frost is a 3/3 flyer with prowess that, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, taps down a creature and prevents it from untapping during its next untap step, giving us another evasive flyer that can lock down our opponent's boards in addition to getting bigger as we cast our spells. The CMC 5 slot is up next with only a single entry, that being Docent of Perfection, a 5/4 flyer that creates a 1/1 wizard whenever we cast an instant or sorcery. Then, if we have 3 or more wizards when this procs, it transforms into Final Iteration, a 6/5 flyer that still creates wizards but now also pumps them by +2/+1 and grants them flying, making it a big evasive body and spell payoff that can easily transform to give us even more evasive bodies to swing in with. Finally, we reach the CMC 6 slot and our last creature with Niv-Mizzet Peyrun, a 5/5 flyer that can't be countered, deals 1 damage to any target whenever we draw a card, and draws us a card whenever anyone casts an instant or sorcery, granting us a big evasive body that doubles up our cantrips draws us cards from our opponent's spells, and gives us removal and burn to boot, making it the perfect top end for our deck. That's it for our creatures, so let's move on to our instants. Some cantrips start us off in the CMC 1 slot with Expedite, Opt, and Quicken. Expedite grants target creature haste until end of turn and draws us a card, making it a decent way to have our commander or another prowess creature swing in immediately when summoned. Opt lets us scry 1 and draw a card, giving us a cheap bit of card selection that replaces itself. Quicken lets us cast our next sorcery at flash speed and draws us a card, enabling us to continue going off on our opponent's turns if we find ourselves with no more instants in hand. More cantrips join us in the CMC 2 slot, starting with Accelerate, Impulse, and Fists of Flame. Accelerate grants target creature haste until end of turn and draws us a card, making it a more expensive copy of Expedite, which we run for the same reason. Impulse has us look at the top 4 cards of our deck, putting 1 into our hand and the rest at the bottom in any order, giving us a means to dig deeper into our deck for more cantrips or payoffs. Fists of Flame draws us a card, then gives target creature trample and +1/+0 for each card drawn this turn until the end of the turn, making it the perfect end to a chain of cantrips to pump our creatures even further. Even more cantrips are up next with Radical Idea, Think Twice, and Thrill of Possibility. Radical Idea and Think Twice both draw us a card and can be cast again from the grave, the former having Jumpstart and the latter having Flashback for 2 and a blue for some 2-for-1 value from our cantrips. Thrill of Possibility has us discard a card and then draw 2, giving us a decent way to dig deeper into our deck and unload bricks from our hand. Finally, as our last cantrip in this slot, we have Psychotic Fury, which grants target multicolored creature double strike until end of turn and draws us a card, granting all our multicolored creatures with prowess-like effects a huge amount of reach to close out games out of nowhere. Some flexible removal options are up next with Abrade and Is It Charm. Abrade either deals 3 damage to a creature or destroys an artifact for a flexible removal option that deals with common targets. Is It Charm either has us counter a non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2, deal 2 damage to a creature, or draw 2 and discard 2, making it a flexible utility card that's usable in a variety of circumstances. A pair of counters are up next with Counterspell and Arcane Denial, both of which allow us to counter any spell, the former having a more restrictive mana cost, and the latter allowing our opponents to draw 2 while we draw 1 during the next end step, both giving us some decent control options to hamper our opponent's plays. Finally, we end this slot with Magma Quake, an X spell that deals X damage to each creature without flying and planeswalkers, giving us a decent instant speed wipe that our commander and a fair amount of our creatures can dodge that deals with planeswalkers as a bonus. The CMC3 slot then brings us some more removal options with Chaos Warp, Kazul's Fury, and Unwind. Chaos Warp spins a permanent back into its owner's deck, having the owner then shuffle and reveal the top card of their deck and allowing them to put it into play if it's a permanent, providing us with a flexible non-destruction removal option that, while a bit risky, is usually better than letting the target remain on the field. Kazul's Fury is a MDFC that's a tap land on its backside that taps for a red and a fling spell on its front, allowing us to sack a creature to deal its power and damage to any target, allowing us to play it early for the mana or later as a way to deal big damage by sacking a pumped prowess creature after it swings and throwing it at our opponent's face. Unwind has us counter a non-creature spell, then untaps up to 3 lands, making it a counter that technically costs nothing so long as we have 3 mana open. Then we close out this slot with Frantic Search and Saloon Division. Frantic Search has us draw 2, discard 2, then untaps up to 3 lands, giving us another technically free spell that digs deeper into our deck. Saloon Division is a MDFC that's a tap land on its backside that taps for a blue and a cantrip on its front face, allowing us to look at the top 6 cards of our deck, pick an instant or sorcery from among them, reveal it, and put it into our hand while putting the rest at the bottom of our deck in a random order, letting us dig deeper into our deck when we don't need the extra land. Finally, we close out our instance in the CMC4 slot with Fact or Fiction, which has us reveal the top 5 cards of our deck and has one of our opponents split them into 2 piles, allowing us to put 1 pile into our hand while sending the other one to the grave, usually netting us 2 to 3 cards at instant speed. That covers all our instance, so let's move on to our sorceries. We'll start off in the CMC1 slot with some blue cantrips in the form of Preordain, Serum Visions, and Slip Through Space. Preordain and Serum Visions are effectively inverses of each other, the former scrying 2 then drawing 1, and the latter drawing 1 then scrying 2, both giving us decent cantrips alongside card selection. Slip Through Time makes target creature unblockable until end of turn and draws us a card, ensuring our creature is going to get in for damage if our opponents happen to be running flyers as well. Moving on to some red cantrips, we have Crash Through, Warlord's Fury, and Rile. Crash Through gives all our creatures trample until end of turn and draws us a card, ensuring our board can get in for damage even if our opponents have blockers. Warlord's Fury gives all our creatures first strike until end of turn and draws us a card, not being as good as the previous entry but still making blocking awkward for our opponents for a single mana, so we'll take it. Rile deals 1 damage to a creature we control and gives it trample until end of turn, drawing us a card as well, again ensuring a creature can get in for damage in the presence of blockers. Finally, we close out this slot with Renegade Tactics and By Force. Renegade Tactics prevents a creature from blocking on the turn it's cast and draws us a card, allowing us to take a blocker out of the equation for even more damage. By Force is an X spell that allows us to destroy X artifacts, giving us the means to blow up all our opponent's artifacts or just 1 or even none if we just needed to trigger more prowess or spells matter effects. The CMC2 slot is up next with its 3 entrants, Cleansing Wildfire, Mizium Mortars, and Chart a Course. Cleansing Wildfire destroys target land and has its controller replace it with a tapped basic from their deck in addition to drawing us a card, making it a good source of spot removal for our opponent's utility lands. Mizium Mortars deals 4 damage to a creature we don't control and can be overloaded for 3 and triple red to do this to all creatures we don't control instead, giving us a low mana single target removal spell or a higher cost one-sided board wipe as needed. Chart a Course simply has us draw 2 cards and discard 1 unless we attacked with a creature this turn, usually drawing us the 2 considering how many evasive creatures we run and how often we attack with our commander. Skipping to the CMC4 slot, we have Mizzix's Mastery, which exiles an instant or sorcery from our grave and creates a copy of it for us to cast for free, or can be overloaded for 5 and triple red to do this for all instants and sorceries in our graveyard instead, giving us a decent recursion effect with a back-breaking overload that can win us the game on the spot if our graveyard is full enough. Finally, we skip to the CMC 8 slot to our last sorcery, Treasure Cruise, which has Delve and allows us to draw 3 cards, giving us the option to exile our spent spells to help pay for its cost, potentially bringing down its casting cost to a single blue for some great card draw. That covers all our sorceries, so let's move on to our enchantments. Moving right into the CMC 2 slot, we have Firemind's Research, which generates a charge counter every time we cast an instant or sorcery, letting us spend 2 of them along with 1 in a blue to draw a card, or 5 counters 1 in a red to deal 5 damage to any target, giving us a mana sink that we can drop early to generate some card draw or damage later as we play our spells. Skipping to CMC 4, we get to our only other enchantment with Teferi's Ageless Insight, which has us draw an additional card whenever we would draw a card, apart from the first card we draw during our draw step, turning all our cantrips into legitimate card draw and allowing us to burn through our deck at double the pace. That covers our enchantments, so let's move on to the artifacts. We'll start off in the CMC 1 slot with everyone's favorite rock, Soul Ring, which taps for 2 colorless for some spectacular ramp and a prowess trigger for our creatures. We'll also be running Basilisk Collar in this slot, an equipment which equips for 2 and gives the equipped creature lifelink and death touch. This makes it so that our commander no longer deals damage to us on missed flips, or can gain us a huge amount of life if equipped to a prowess creature instead. Quickly going down our mana rocks in the CMC 2 slot, we have Arcane Signet, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity, Izzet Signet, which we can pay 1 and tap to generate both of our colors, Talisman of Creativity, which taps for either a colorless or either of our colors if we take a damage, Fire Diamond and Sky Diamond, both which come into play tapped and tap for a red and blue respectively, and finally Thought Vessel, which taps for a colorless and removes our maximum hand size limit. And finally we have our last 2 artifacts with Scroll of the Masters and Runechanter's Pike. Scroll of the Masters gains a lore counter whenever we cast a non-creature spell, and we can pay 3 and tap it to give target creature +1/+1 for each lore counter on it until end of turn, giving us another payoff for our spells that we can drop early and pumps our creatures massively after only a few cantrips. Runechanter's Pike is an equipment that equips for 2 and gives the equipped creature first strike and +X+0, X being equal to the amount of instants and sorceries we have in our grave, giving us another powerful cantrip payoff to put on our commander or other evasive creatures for some truly massive damage. That covers our artifacts, so let's move on to our planeswalkers. Our only planeswalker this time around is Saheeli, Sublime Artificer, who comes into play with 5 loyalty and has the following effects. As a static ability, she creates a 1/1 artifact whenever we cast a non-creature spell. Her -2 then allows us to turn an artifact we control into a copy of another target creature or artifact we control until end of turn, which is still considered an artifact. This gives us another means to go wide with tokens and the ability to double up on a prowess creature or cantrip payoff once or twice for a very powerful turn if she sticks around. That wraps up our planeswalkers, so let's move on to our land base. Starting with our mana lands, we have Command Tower, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity, Shivan Reef, which taps for a colorless or either our colors if we take a damage, Frostboil Snarl, which comes into play tapped unless we reveal an island or mountain as it ETBs and taps for either of our colors, Sulphur Falls, which comes into play tapped unless we control an island or mountain and taps for either of our colors, Temple of Epiphany, which comes into play tapped, taps for either of our colors and scries 1 when it ETBs, and finally Prismari Campus, which comes into play tapped, taps for either of our colors and we can pay 4 and tap to scry 1. For utility lands, we're running Reliquary Tower, Ghost Quarter, and Scavenger Grounds. Reliquary Tower taps for a colorless and removes our maximum hand size limit, which is a great boon for us to prevent us from discarding down, considering we're running a fair amount of cards that replace themselves alongside our normal draw spells. Ghost Quarter taps for a colorless and we can tap it and sack it to destroy target land, giving its controller a basic from their deck to replace it, making it a good source of spot removal for our opponent's utility lands. Scavenger Grounds taps for a colorless and we can pay 2 and sack it to exile all cards from all graveyards, providing us with a powerful source of graveyard hate that affects the entire board. Lastly, we're running 12 islands and 12 mountains as our basics to fill out our land base. So now that we've covered all the cards in the deck, let's take a look at this deck's breakdown. This deck currently has 20 creatures including the commander, 21 instants, 13 sorceries, 2 enchantments, 10 artifacts, 1 planeswalker, and 35 lands including MDFCs. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 19 instants and sorceries that cantrip, 14 cards that care about spells being cast, and 9 creatures with prowess-like effects to pump themselves either when we cast our spells or power themselves up with them from the grave. This makes about a fifth of the cards in our deck capable of replacing themselves when cast, alongside a multitude of payoffs for these effects, whether they be our creatures growing bigger, creating tokens, or simply burning our opponents. For general deck stats, we have 10 ramp sources, 11 card draw sources not including cantrips, 10 targeted removal sources, and 3 board wipes, giving us a standard array of ramp, draw, removal, and wipes, though if we include our cantrips, this bumps our draw to a total of 30 cards, which would normally be overkill, but in this case works perfectly with what this deck wants to do. Looking at our mana curve, we have 13 1-drops, 30 2-drops, 13 3-drops, 8 4-drops, 1 5-drop, 1 6-drop, 0 7-drops, and 1 8-drop. Giving us an extremely low-to-the-ground curve that allows us to play back-to-back spells with ease to proc off our payoffs, chewing through our deck at a breakneck speed. Currently, this deck is valued at $64.52, not counting the price of basic lands or shipping. This price was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For side grades, additional spells matters payoffs would be right at home in this build. Sentinel Tower is a great form of burn, quickly ramping up once we hit 3+ spells in a row to get some serious damage going. Storm Conduit would be a good addition as well, again providing us with burn as we cast our spells and allowing us to either peek at our deck or copy our spells, which are two effects that are always appreciated. Octavia Living Thesis would also warrant consideration, since we can easily fulfill her discounted summoning condition and she turns our creatures into 8/8s for extra damage while being incredibly hard to deal with herself. Additional card draw matters cards would also find a home here. Psychosis Crawler, for example, is a potent way to burn out the table while getting huge as we continue to draw cards. Niv-Mizzet the Firemind also weaponizes our draw for some single target burner damage, and the Locust God would also be a good include, creating lots of evasive flyers while sporting a decently statted evasive body itself and being hard to deal with permanently. For upgrades, Burgi God of Storytelling is a great way to generate mana as we cast our spells to keep our spell chains going longer. Virion Voice of Duality is a powerful prowess enabler, powering both himself and other prowess-like effects as we cast our spells. Aetherflux Reservoir could warrant consideration as a payoff for our spellcasting to enable to instantly blow one of our opponents away. And of course, if you want to make our commander's coin flips more reliable, Krark's Thumb increases the odds of getting heads significantly. And finally, Fierce Guardianship and Deflecting Swat are potent protection spells that cast for free so long as our commander's out, but otherwise are anything but free since they use up almost the entire budget all on their own. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. The channel has cracked yet another milestone with 450 subs, bringing it that much closer to the halfway mark to that sweet YouTube monetization. Again, I couldn't thank you folks enough for all the support. This channel couldn't grow without you and I appreciate it sincerely. Moving on to the votes, after a hard-fought poll, the next video will be featuring Lunis, Cryptozoologist, as voted by Chris Hogan, Douglas Woodard, Johnny Billick, Matthew Giritz, Mike Hexmer, One Trichophany, Power Keck, and however you would pronounce one continuous line. That means the next lineup will be featuring a General Ferris Rockrick, Sithis Harvest's Hand, and Karth the Lion, so let me know in the comments which of these three you would like to see an upcoming video on. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.